The class screamed over Deathworld missions. The Deathworld girl scoffed. I slept where wolves denned. The number came back as a 2.1. Prethullian had not seen a 2.1 in 41 years of running the intake desk, and for a moment he simply looked at it the way a person looks at a word they have read so many times it has stopped meaning anything. Then one of his eye clusters opened, the front left one, the first to respond when something did not fit, and he checked for a processing error. There was not one. He ran the scan again anyway. The second result matched the first. 2.1, against a Class 12 minimum of 7.4. He sat back in his chair. The intake office smelled the way it always smelled. Recycled air, the faint mineral bite of the ion filtration grid, and the dry, slightly burnt smell of certification paper that had been run through the reader too many times. He had worked in this room since before most of this cohort had been born, and he had never once felt the room was strange. This morning, with the number sitting on his display, something about the recycled air felt like it was coming from the wrong direction. He pulled up the student file. Nara, 19 years old, human female, Earth origin, subregion listed as Karak Ridge, Northern Sector, enrolled in Advanced Xenobiology 401 under the Interspecies Exchange Program. He read the kit manifest. No sealed footwear, no atmospheric buffer vest, no microclimate regulator, one datapad in a case covered with adhesive stickers of what his translator identified as Earth fauna, one pack visibly worn at the shoulder straps, one item clipped to the outside of the pack, an orange and white disc, stamped with a number and what appeared to be a trail code. He logged it as a non-standard personal item, function unclear, probably decorative. He did not look up the trail code. She walked in 3 minutes later, and he understood immediately why his display had not felt wrong enough. She looked like exactly what the file said she was: 19, slight dark braid, a faded shirt with a mountain range printed on it that his translator read as some kind of tourist graphic. She sat down across from him without being invited to, looked at the room the way a person looks at a waiting area, and settled into the chair with the particular ease of someone who had no reason to be nervous. He found this more unsettling than if she had been. Nara, he said, because he always started with the name. That's me, she said. He turned his display to face her and let her look at the number for a moment. Your kit equivalence score is 2.1. The minimum for a Class 12 field assignment is 7.4. I'm placing you on remedial gear review before the prep sequence begins. This is not a failure. It is a recalibration. She looked at the display. She looked at it the way someone looks at a menu they have already decided not to order from. Then she looked back at him and said, "Sure." His front left eye cluster was still open. His second one began to open. He reached under the desk and produced the standard Class 12 sealed survival suit, the one he recommended to every under-equipped student, rated for pressure variance, atmospheric toxins, and thermal extremes up to 62 degrees C differential. He set it on the desk between them. She looked at it for a moment. "What does it do that skin doesn't?" she asked. He opened his placement log and began typing. He told himself, as he always did before he started the formal briefing, that the statistics existed for good reasons. 41 years of placement records. The 97.3% post-field accuracy rate on his survivability models, and he was not going to think about that number right now. He was going to think about the student in front of him and the information she needed to make good decisions about her survival. The Class 12 unguided survival rate, he said, is 32%. He watched her face. Most species, when they heard that number, produced a specific cluster of responses: paling of skin or membrane, a tightening of the hands, a very slight forward lean that indicated the body was preparing to receive important information. It was almost universal. He had been watching for it for 4 decades, and he could read it across 17 species. She nodded slowly. "Is that unguided?" "Yes, unguided without compliant kit. With a qualified field pair and full gear, survival odds improve substantially. My dad used to say unguided is the whole problem, she said. He wasn't a big fan of going anywhere without knowing the ground first. He wrote, human student receives the 32% figure. No visible physiological stress response. Either the biological fear architecture is significantly different from standard, or she did not understand the statistic. Note: verify comprehension before Rung assignment. He explained the kit equivalence principle. He had explained it in various forms to over 4,000 students, and he explained it now with the same care he always brought to it. The index models a student's gear loadout against the target environment, because gear is the variable a student controls, and because origin biology, while a factor, is treated as a stable baseline that compliant equipment either compensates for or cannot. The 2.1 score reflected the gear she had presented. It was not a judgment on her capability. It was a measurement of what she had brought. Sure, she said again. He looked at her. Do you have questions about the index? Not really. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone tilts their head when something is mildly confusing but not confusing enough to pursue. I guess I just never needed most of that stuff before. He wrote, student appears to be taking the briefing seriously. Unclear if never needed it before refers to a prior field assignment or to a generalized confidence not supported by the data. Follow up in Rung sequence. He did not follow up on it before the Rung sequence. She was looking at the pack on her lap. She reached up and touched the orange and white disc clipped to the outside, not adjusting it, just the brief automatic contact of someone confirming a thing is still there, and then let her hand drop. He had not logged what the number stamped on it was. He logged the gesture instead. Student maintains contact with personal item throughout briefing. Item likely carries sentimental value, not relevant to field clearance. He stood. Follow me to Environmental Simulation Hall 4. We'll begin the preparation sequence. She stood up, pulled the pack onto one shoulder, and followed him without checking the room for anything she might have left behind. He noticed this, and he was not sure why he noticed it, and he wrote nothing about it. Environmental Simulation Hall 4 was a large room with a climate control grid set into every wall surface, and a floor that could be reconfigured for terrain type within about 4 minutes. It smelled of synthetic mineral and the faint residue of the atmosphere from the last simulation, something high oxygen, he thought, from a session 3 days ago. The lighting was neutral white, which meant it was currently between settings. He walked to the coordinator's panel on the east wall and brought up the session parameters. 4 rungs. That was the standard prep sequence for Class 12 placement clearance. He had run it approximately 800 times, and his record was clean. No student had been cleared for a Class 12 assignment without completing all 4 rungs with compliant kit in place. The sequence was not punitive. It was calibration. The rungs existed because the environments existed, and the environments did not negotiate. 3 other students had already arrived for the morning session and were waiting near the center of the room. He ran through their kit checks quickly. 2 Selvari exchange students in full gear, 1 Drenathi in a sealed atmospheric suit, everything compliant. He filed the checks and turned back to Nara. She was looking at the ceiling. Is this the room where the humidity simulation runs? She asked. Rung 1 is the atmospheric acclimatization chamber, he said. High oxygen, high humidity, elevated temperature, 38 degrees, the benchmark. Like August, she said, not to him exactly, more the way a person says something when they are confirming a private thought. In the valley. He looked at her. I'm sorry. She looked back at him. Nothing, what's the benchmark? He explained the benchmark. Most non-Earth species reached cognitive performance threshold within 4 minutes in the Rung 1 conditions without a cooling suit, and the standard passing response was to request the cooling rig at that point, which confirmed they had correctly identified their limit. Requesting the rig was a pass. Failing to identify the limit was not. She was nodding. She had the expression of someone listening to directions to a place they have already been. He told himself that was projection. He did not write it in the log. "Ready?" he said. "Sure," she said. It was the third time she had said it. He was starting to notice. He set the chamber parameters. The humidity rose first. The air in the room thickened almost immediately, becoming the particular dense, warm weight of a high-moisture environment at elevation. Then the temperature began to climb. The lighting shifted to the amber spectrum setting that the simulation used for tropical high-humidity environments. Thorvik 7, one of the Selvari students, activated his cooling rig within 40 seconds. The Dranathi student was making a note on her datapad. Nara reached both arms over her head and stretched slowly, with the ease of someone starting a morning. Prethulian watched the timer. 1 minute. 2. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the second Selvari student activated her cooling rig and filed a formal distress flag within protocol, well within the time limit, a good response. He logged both activations with timestamps. Nara's arms had come down. She was standing with her hands loose at her sides, and she was looking at the amber-lit far wall with an expression that was, as far as he could tell, nothing. Not effort, not concentration, not the subtle muscular tightening he associated with a species managing thermal discomfort. Nothing, the expression of someone in a room. At minute 4, Thorvik 7, who was in full cooling rig, who should have been managing comfortably, pinged distress. His equipment log showed his suit's thermal load had spiked. He needed to be moved to a recovery pod. Standard protocol. Prethulian ended the Rung 1 session and keyed the exit lighting. He looked at Nara. "You can continue if you want," she said. "I was going to ask if the humidity could go up." He wrote 6 words in the log, then he deleted them. Then he wrote them again, human student, no distress indicators at 9 minutes. He added a footnote, equipment may be malfunctioning, flagged for biosensor audit. He was aware, as he wrote it, that he did not actually believe the equipment was malfunctioning. He was aware that the footnote was the kind of note a person writes when they want the record to reflect a possibility other than the one in front of them. His second eye cluster was fully open now, both of them bloomed and steady. He closed the Rung 1 parameters and began pulling up Rung 2. Rung 2 was terrain instability. He had designed the parameters himself, 15 years ago. After a placement, cohort lost 2 students on a Class 9 assignment because neither of them had been adequately tested on shifting substrate. The floor of Hall 4 could be reconfigured to replicate a Rutan stone surface at 17% incline, with a slow lateral shift underneath. The kind of ground that moved just enough to make each footfall a small recalculation. Standard galactic bipeds needed stabilizing exo-ankles to walk it safely. That was not a weakness. It was simply a fact about galactic bipeds and what their joints were built for. He set the parameters. The floor began its reconfiguration with the low grinding sound it always made, tiles rotating and locking into the angled surface. He watched his 4 students, the 2 remaining Selvari, the Dranathi and Nara, find their footing as the incline settled. The Dranathi student deployed her balance rig within the first 20 seconds. Good response time. He logged it. The first Selvari reached the lower grade marker and stopped. His stabilizers were active, but his posture said he was working harder than the equipment should have required. The second Selvari had not started yet. She was making an adjustment to her ankle brace at the bottom of the incline. Nara walked up the slope with her hands in her pockets. She did not look at her feet. She did not look at the walls for reference points. She walked the way a person walks down a corridor they use every day, not fast, not carelessly, but with the particular economy of someone whose body had already solved this problem and filed the solution somewhere below conscious thought. At the halfway mark, she stepped over a root protrusion without breaking pace. At the 3/4 mark, she angled slightly left, found a flatter section, and used it. She reached the top, turned around and looked back at the lower third. The second Selvari was still negotiating the first-grade marker. The first Selvari had activated his emergency balance rig. The Drenathi student was doing well. Prethulian reached the top behind her. He was monitoring, not competing, but he was aware of how long it had taken him and how long it had taken her, and the numbers were not comfortable. "My dad called this the good path," she said. He had not asked her anything. She said it to the room, or to the students below, or possibly to no one. "What did he call the bad path?" he asked. He was a scientist, it was a data point. She looked at him with the mild attention she gave everything. There was a creek running down the middle of it, flooded in spring, iced over by November. Something like to use it a black bear twice. Different bear each time, or maybe the same one. Hard to say. He looked at her, a Class A Ursid predator. "Yeah," she looked back at the students below. "Dad said the trick on the bad path was to make noise so it knew you were coming. Bears don't usually want trouble. They just want to know what you are." He thought about writing this down. He wrote instead, "Rung 2 complete human student traverses terrain without stabilization equipment, without reference behavior, in faster than standard time. Origin sub-region documentation note to self. Review before Rung 3. He did not review it before Rung 3. At the bottom of the log entry, after the student timestamps and balance rig activations, he added, "Query. Are all humans raised in active field environments, or is this individual an outlier? Research pending." He had been writing "research pending" for 41 years and had never once found the research pending when he came back for it. He was aware of this. He moved them to Rung 3. The Biohazard identification drill was his best rung. He said this to himself, not to his students because it would have been unprofessional, but he believed it. 22 specimens laid out on a long table under clean white light, 11 edible, 11 lethal, all paired by visual similarity close enough that even experienced field personnel struggled. He had designed the pairings himself. The lethal specimens were not chosen for the ones that looked obviously dangerous. The ones he chose were the ones that looked like something safe. That was the point. That was what the field was. The standard window was 20 minutes. The species average correct identification under time pressure was 61%. A score below 70% triggered a field assignment downgrade. In 41 years of running this drill, he had never had a student score perfect marks in the full window. Docent apprentice Kell was already at the table. He was Prethulian's highest-ranked Selvari placement this year, 3 semesters of specimen taxonomy, and he approached the drill with the focused intensity of someone who had prepared specifically for this moment. He was good. Prethulian expected him to score in the high 80s, possibly 90. He set the timer for 20 minutes. Nara sat down beside Kell and looked at the table. Then she started. He was watching Kell because Kell was his benchmark, and so he almost missed it. The way she moved down the table was not the way students move through the drill. Students lingered. Students compared. Students went back. She went left to right at the speed of someone reading a list they had read before, and her hand moved to each specimen and turned it once and set it in the correct column and moved to the next one. At 90 seconds, he heard the soft tone of a completion flag. He looked at her section. He ran the verification. He ran it again. 22 of 22. Kell was still working. His fourth eye cluster had not opened at all. He was concentrating too hard for peripheral processing. He finished at 12 minutes. Prethulian ran his verification, 14 of 22. The room was quiet for a moment in the specific way that rooms are quiet when something has happened that no one has a procedure for. "The tricky ones are the berry clusters," Nara said. She was not explaining herself. She said it the way a person says something that follows naturally from a thought they've been having. "We had a saying about the leaf pattern. Everything else you smell first. The lethal ones usually have a sharper edge underneath the good smell, like they're trying too hard." She picked up one of the lethal specimens and turned it over. My grandmother called these creekberries. She'd have had a word for this whole table. She set it back down. She would have called it a light Tuesday. Kel looked at her. Prethulian opened his log. He sat with his hands on the keys for a moment. Then he typed 6 words: human, 2222, self, recalibrating. Log paused. He stared at the 6 words. He did not add to them. His front left eye cluster was fully open. His second was fully open. His third, the one on his right side that he had always thought of as the slow one, the last to respond, the one that opened when something stopped being a puzzle and became a problem, his third had begun, very slightly, to open. He closed the biohazard parameters and stood up. Rung 4, he said. The Nocturnal exposure protocol was the rung he had never had to modify. Every rung in the sequence had been adjusted over the years, a parameter here, a threshold there, a benchmark recalibrated after enough data came in from the field. Rung 4 had never needed it. The mechanics were simple: lights out, temperature down to 4 degrees, predator vocalizations at high volume, and the benchmark was equally simple: activate your emergency beacon within 90 seconds, and you had passed, because activating your beacon meant you had correctly identified the danger and asked for help. That was the skill, not survival, recognition. No student had ever failed Rung 4 by being too calm. He ran the 4 students through the pre-rung briefing. He explained the parameters. He explained the benchmark. He watched their faces the way he always did. The Drenathi student's membrane flickered. The first Selvari's posture shifted. The second Selvari asked a quiet question about the vocalizations, and he answered it. Standard responses. He wrote nothing because there was nothing unusual to write. He looked at Nara. She was looking at the simulation chamber door with the mild expression she had brought to every rung. "Any questions?" he said. "What kind of predator audio?" she asked. "Large Ursid and Lupin vocalizations," he said. "The most statistically effective at triggering alarm responses across known bipedal species." She nodded slowly, the way she had nodded at the 32% figure. He opened the chamber door. The monitoring panel was on the outside of the chamber, behind a sealed panel, and he watched through it. He had watched through this panel hundreds of times. He knew what the panel looked like when a rung was going the way it was supposed to go. The lights died. The temperature readout on his panel began its descent. The vocalization system kicked in. He could hear it faintly through the seal, the low, cycling sound of the Ursid audio, then the Lupin audio cycling in underneath it. 7 emergency beacons activated within 60 seconds. The 2 Selvari and the Drenathi were all in the first wave. He logged the timestamps. Good times. Clean recognition. He watched Nara's biosignature on the panel. Stationary, core temperature stable, respiration normal. He looked at the timer, 63 seconds. He looked back at her signature. Stationary, stable, normal. He was reaching for the safety lighting override. The protocol said 90 seconds before intervention. When her voice came through the audio feed, calm and clear in the dark. "Is the wolf audio on a loop?" He stopped. "It repeats every 40 seconds, she said. "I've heard it twice." He did not move. Also, 4 degrees is just a cold snap. A pause. The predator audio cycled through its loop. "Do you have a blanket in there, or should I build something?" He sat down. He was not sure when he had decided to sit down. He was simply sitting, and the monitoring panel was in front of him, and Nara's biosignature was still showing stable normal on the readout, and somewhere in the chamber behind the sealed door, she was sitting on the floor in the dark asking him about blankets. He reached for the termination panel and ended the simulation. The lights in the chamber came back up. He looked at his log. The entry for Rung 4 was open and blank. He did not know what to write in it, so he wrote nothing yet. and he sat for a moment with the blank entry open, and his third eye cluster now fully open alongside the first two, and he thought about the note he had written to himself about reviewing her origin subregion documentation. He had not reviewed it. He was going to review it now. He opened the origin subregion documentation at 14:07, which he noted in the log because he noted everything in the log, and because later he would want to know exactly when. The file loaded. He read the header entry for Karok Ridge, Northern Sector, Earth Origin. Then he read it again. Then he opened the cross-reference to the Galactic Terrain Classification Index, because he wanted to be certain he was reading the cross-reference correctly, and because 41 years of placement records had taught him that the worst mistakes happened when a person saw something unexpected and assumed they had understood it. Subcode 4B. No road vehicle access. Perennial large predator corridors. Seasonal thermal range listed as -28 to +41 degrees. Active seismic microzone. And at the bottom of the entry, in the standard classification font, he had read 10,000 times without once having cause to stop at it. Classified as Class 12 equivalent microbiome under the 2087 Revised Planetary Assessment Index. He sat with that sentence for a moment. His third eye cluster was fully open now. His fourth, the one on the back left, the one that had never once opened during a placement session in 41 years, because it only opened when something required his full attention from a direction he had not been looking. His fourth began, very slowly, to open. He went back to the main file. He opened the exchange program dossier, the cultural orientation packet she had submitted when she enrolled, the one that was technically the faculty onboarding team's domain and not his, the one he had never once read in 41 years of placement work, because the Kid Equivalence Index did not require it. He read it now. The childhood activity log was filed as part of the cultural orientation submission, under the heading field Experience, pre-academic, and whoever had set up the exchange program intake form had clearly expected this section to contain entries like school hiking trips or supervised nature walks. The first entry was dated when she was 9 years old. First solo overnight Karok Ridge North Face, route NR09. Duration, 1 night. Return, unassisted. Weather, clear to overcast. Temperature dropped to -11 by 300. No incident. He read it. He read no incident. He thought about what no incident meant at -11 degrees on a mountain at 9 years old, and he thought about the thermal range listed in the subclassification entry, and he kept reading. Age 11. Winter traverse Karok Ridge North Face to the Selk Family Way Station, 4-hour route. Solo. Conditions, early snowpack, low visibility after hour 2. Trail marker NR09 used for orientation. No incident. He looked at the trail marker clipped to her pack, the orange and white disc, the one he had logged as probably decorative. The code stamped on it was NR09. He did not move for a moment. The intake office was quiet. The ion filtration grid hummed the way it always hummed, and the recycled air came from the direction it always came from, and he sat very still and thought about a disc he had filed as decorative because he had not looked up what it was. Age 12. Fauna encounter large ursid, estimated mass 180 kilograms, Karok Ridge Lower Corridor. Father present but non-intervening. Encounter duration approximately 4 minutes. Resolution, animal moved off. No injury. Filed by Rank Selk Father. 3 words in the father's note. Bear moved off. He thought about what she had told him on the terrain incline. Bears don't usually want trouble. They just want to know what you are. He closed the dossier. He opened a new log entry. He began to type. He deleted it. He began again, and this time he let himself write what was in front of him rather than what he could account for. The Kid Equivalence Index models gear against target environment. It does not account for a student whose origin biology has already been pre-adapted to a Class 12 equivalent microbiome over 19 years of continuous field exposure. The 2.1 score is not Nara Selk's score. It is the score of the gear she elected not to carry, in an environment she did not need the gear for. These are different things. He stopped. He sat at the desk in the intake office with the cursor blinking and his 4 eye clusters open, all 4 of them, bloomed and steady, and for the first time in 41 years they were not in sync with one another. The front left had been open longest. The back left had opened last. Each one had opened independently, from a different direction, because the information had come from 4 different directions at once, and his biology had done what it did when that happened, which was try to look at all of it at the same time. A junior docent pre-Thullian knew him only as Fenish, 3rd year, who usually spent his afternoons running equipment checks in Hall 3, walked past the open door of the intake office, glanced in and stopped. He said afterward that what he had seen was pre-Thullian sitting at his desk with all 4 eye clusters open and not in sync, and that in 3 years of working in the same wing of the building, he had never once seen more than 2 open at the same time, and that he had asked if everything was all right. Pre-Thullian had told him everything was fine and to close the door on his way out. Fenish closed the door. Pre-Thullian looked at the cursor. He finished the entry. The current model is structurally incomplete, requesting full doctrine review. He filed the note to the Faculty Review Board at 14:31, 24 minutes after he had opened the subclassification entry. He had spent most of those 24 minutes reading and rereading the same documents, which was not something he did, and writing and deleting the same sentences, which was also not something he did. He filed the note. He sat back. On his desk, beside the display, was the sealed survival suit he had produced at the beginning of the intake session. He had set it down when she had asked her question, and he had not moved it since. It sat where he had put it, rated for pressure variance and atmospheric toxins and thermal extremes up to 62 degrees of differential, designed for environments exactly like the one she had grown up in. She had grown up in it without the suit. He thought about the 32% figure, the unguided survival rate. He thought about the fact that she had heard the number and said, "My dad used to say unguided is the whole problem," and he had taken that as a sign she understood the statistic, and he had been correct that she understood the statistic, and he had been entirely wrong about what understanding it meant for her. She understood it the way someone understands a number that describes other people. The way a person from a wet climate understands a drought statistic. He looked at the note he had filed. The 2.1 score is not Nara Selk's score. Outside the window of the intake office, the small rectangular window that looked out over the station's internal transit corridor, he could see students moving between buildings. He watched them for a moment. 3 Selvari in full gear, a pair of Drenathi with their atmospheric cases, 1 human he did not recognize walking quickly with their head down. All of them, in one way or another, carrying what they needed to survive wherever they were going. He thought about a 9-year-old on a mountain at -11 degrees. No incident. He thought about the trail marker clipped to her pack. He thought about what she had said in the terrain simulation, and in the atmospheric chamber, and in the biohazard drill, and in the dark with the predator audio cycling every 40 seconds, and he thought about the fact that she had not said any of it to impress him or explain herself. She had said it the way a person mentions the weather in a city they have lived in for a long time. The Faculty Review Board would convene when they convened. That was not in his control. What was in his control was the next step in the documentation, and the next step was to locate Nara Selk and inform her that her placement status was under formal review. He picked up his datapad. He sent a message to the junior docent's roster asking where she was. The reply came back in less than a minute. She was in the common rest area on sub-level 2, eating something. The docent who had replied added, with the particular tone of someone reporting something they were unsure was relevant, "She seems fine. She's asking about the next session." Prethelian looked at that last sentence for a long time. She was asking about the next session. He had terminated Rung 4 early. He had filed a doctrine review request with the Faculty Review Board. His 4 eye clusters were still not back in their usual sequence, and she was on sublevel 2 asking when the next session was. He set the datapad down. He was going to have to go talk to her, and he was going to have to do it before the board convened, and he was aware that he did not have a procedure for this particular conversation, because the procedure assumed that at this point in the intake process, the student was the one who was uncertain about something. He straightened the datapad on the desk. He straightened it again. He picked up the stylus beside his display and set it down in the same place. Then he stood up and went to sublevel 2. She was sitting at one of the long tables in the rest area with a container of something from the station canteen and her datapad open beside her. She was reading something on it. She looked up when he came in, registered him, and looked back at the datapad in the way of someone finishing a sentence before they respond. "Dr. Prethelian," she said, not a question, not a greeting exactly, just the name placed. He sat down across from her. He had not planned to sit down, but the chairs were there, and it seemed like the right shape for this conversation. "The Faculty Review Board will be convening to review your placement status," he said. "That is a formal process. It may take some time." She nodded, "Okay. In the meantime, your status is under review, which means you're not cleared for field assignment." "Okay." He looked at her. He had expected, he was not sure what he had expected, some version of uncertainty or frustration, or the particular flattened quality people got when they had been told their work was being reviewed. She looked the way she had looked in his intake office that morning, sitting across from him with the kit score on the display between them, like a person in a waiting area with nowhere else to be. "Do you have questions about the process?" he said. She thought about it. "Can I get the compass back? I left it in the simulation room." He looked at her. She looked back at him. "I'll send someone for it," he said. She nodded and looked back at her datapad. He stood up. He was halfway to the door when she said, without looking up, "Is the board meeting about the drill scores or about where I'm from?" He stopped. He turned around. She was still reading her datapad. She asked it the way she had asked about the wolf audio, calmly, in the dark, without urgency, as if the answer would be interesting but not surprising. "Both," he said. She nodded. "Okay," she said, and turned a page. The Faculty Review Board met the following morning in Conference Room 7 on the upper administrative level, which was a room Prethelian had entered approximately 300 times in 41 years and had never once found interesting. It had 8 seats, a long table, a display panel on the far wall, and a window that looked out at the same transit corridor he could see from his intake office, just from a higher angle. The board members filed in. Senior Docent Vreth, who ran the Species Physiology Division, Adjunct Coordinator Massel, who handled the exchange program's academic track, a faculty observer from the External Audit Committee whose name Prethelian always had to check the roster to recall, and 2 junior members who took notes and did not speak unless spoken to. Nara came in last. She had the same pack. The disc was still clipped to the outside of it. She sat where they directed her, at the near end of the table, and set the pack on the floor beside her chair, and looked at the display panel the way she looked at everything, which was with the mild attention of someone who expected the room to make sense eventually. Prethelian had submitted his notes the night before. The board had read them. He knew this because Vreth had sent a message at 23:14 that said only, "Confirmed receipt. We'll need her to bring the trail marker." He had forwarded that to Nara. She had replied, "Okay." Vreth opened the session and ran through the procedural framing, the kit equivalence review, the Rung sequence results, the doctrine note Prethullian had filed. She read the relevant section of the note aloud, which Prethullian found slightly uncomfortable because he had written it quickly and under conditions he was still processing, but the words held. Then she asked Nara to unclip the disc from her pack and place it on the table. Nara reached down, unclipped it, and set it on the table. It sat under the conference room lighting looking exactly like what it was, a battered enamel disc, orange and white, the paint worn at the edges, a number and a trail code stamped into the face. "Can you tell us what the number is?" Vreth said. Nara looked at it. 2,247, she said. "That's the elevation in meters. The trail code is NR09. It's the north face route on Karok Ridge, where I grew up." She paused. "My dad marked it for me when I was 8 so I could find my way back if the weather closed in." The room was quiet. Adjunct Coordinator Massel leaned forward slightly. "You were 8. He came with me the first few times," she said. "Then I went alone." The room was quiet again, in a different way than it had been before. Prethullian watched the board members and thought about something he had not had a word for until this moment. The specific silence of people who have received information and are waiting for their understanding to catch up with it. Vreth asked a few more questions. She asked about the winter traverse at 11, the route, the conditions, the visibility. Nara answered each one in the same tone she used for everything, which was the tone of someone describing something ordinary. Vreth asked about the bear at 12. "He was on the lower corridor," Nara said. "Big male, probably 3 years old, maybe 4. He stood up when he heard me, which they do. I stopped and made some noise and he came down and moved off." She considered for a moment. "Dad said the trick is to not run. Running tells them you've decided they're in charge." Massel wrote something down. The faculty observer from the audit committee, his name was on the roster as Docent Koss, had not spoken yet. He spoke now. "The subclassification lists the thermal floor at -28, he said. "You did your first solo overnight at 9. "It was clear that night," she said. "Only got to -11. Koss looked at his notes. He looked back at her. He wrote something. The board went into a brief recess. Prethullian stood near the window during the recess and looked at the transit corridor below. He watched a group of Selvari students cross it in full field gear, atmospheric suits, sealed footwear, balance rigs clipped to their belts. Standard kit. The correct thing to carry. He had spent 41 years being certain that the correct thing to carry was the variable that mattered. And he had been right, consistently, in 97.3% of placements. Because in 97.3% of placements, the student had not already spent 19 years being shaped by the environment the gear was designed for. 3 things the kit equivalence index did not account for. No student who outgrew the ceiling. No origin environment that had already done the work. No gap between the score and what was actually standing in front of him. He had built the index. He had maintained it for 41 years. And it had been correct every time except this one, which meant it had been incomplete every time, and he had not known. Nara was at the far end of the room, eating something she had brought in a small container. She did not appear to be thinking about anything in particular. The board reconvened. Vreth delivered the finding in the measured voice she used for formal institutional language, which was the same voice she used for everything else because she was that kind of person. The kit equivalence protocol, she said, would be suspended for students presenting with origin environment classifications at or above Class 12 equivalent, pending a full doctrine review. A separate assessment framework would be developed. Prethullian's note would be filed as the initiating document of that review. Nara's placement status was under formal reclassification. Vreth asked Prethullian if he wished to amend the intake score on record. He said yes. He walked to the display panel. He opened Nara's intake file. He found the field where the 2.1 had been sitting since yesterday morning. He deleted it. He typed, "Standard index not applicable, origin environment exceeds index ceiling." He filed it. He looked at the field for a moment. There was no number in it now, just the sentence. He had never once in 41 years filed an intake score without a number in it, and he found, somewhat to his surprise, that the absence of the number felt more accurate than any number he could have put there. He stepped back from the panel. Vreth asked Nara if she had questions about the reclassification process. She said, "Can I get the compass back? I left it in the simulation room." Vreth looked at Prethullian. Prethullian looked at the junior docent nearest the door and made a small gesture. The docent left. Nara picked up the trail disc from the table and clipped it back onto her pack. The formal assignment came through that afternoon. Nara Selk, the document read, was assigned to the Class 12 field cohort for the current semester as a guide attachment rather than a student placement. Her role would be to accompany the cohort through the initial field orientation and provide working knowledge of Class 12 terrain navigation. By the end of the day, 3 junior docents had submitted formal requests to accompany her cohort for field observation hours. Prethullian read their requests. They had each phrased it slightly differently, but the shape underneath the phrasing was the same. They wanted to watch how she moved through an environment that, according to every index the Academy used, should have required a significant amount of gear and preparation and structured support to survive. He approved all 3 requests. He sent a message to the cohort notification list with the relevant dates and departure times. At the bottom of the message he added, because it was relevant and because he could not think of a reason not to, "Note from guide, wear layers, morning will be cold." He stared at that line for a moment, then he sent it. The junior docent came back with the compass at 16:44. Prethullian happened to be crossing the sub-level corridor when it happened, and so he saw it. The docent handed the compass to Nara, who was standing near the exit with her pack on, apparently on her way somewhere. She took it and turned it once in her hand the way she had touched the disc. The brief automatic contact of checking a thing is still what it was, and clipped it to the outside of the same pocket where the disc lived. She said, "Thanks." She looked at Prethullian across the corridor. She gave a small nod, the way people nod when they have nothing to add but want to acknowledge they have seen you. Then she walked out. He stood in the corridor for a moment. On her pack, side by side in the same pocket, the compass and the disc. The compass pointing wherever she was going. The disc marked with a number and a trail code for a mountain she had walked alone at 11 years old in low visibility with the snowpack coming in. He went back to his office that evening and opened the placement log for the last time on the Nara Selk file. Under Echo Object, he typed the formal designation, Trail Marker Disc, Karok Ridge Backcountry, Elevation 2247 m, Trail Code NR09. Carried by student as personal item throughout intake and prep sequence. Filed to amended intake record as origin verification artifact. He looked at what he had written. He saved it. His 4 eye clusters had been slowly closing since the board meeting ended, each one at its own pace, settling back into their usual resting state. The front left closed last, as it had opened first, or rather, it took the longest to be satisfied that there was nothing left requiring it to stay open. He had never noticed before that the front left was the last to close. He suspected it had always been the last to close, and he had simply never had occasion to pay attention to it. He opened a final entry in the log, not the Echo Object entry, a different one, the summary field at the top of the file, the one that showed up in the placement record alongside her name. He thought for a while about what to write. He wrote, "The planet that could kill everything else simply raised her, and she thought it was home." He saved the file. He closed the log. Outside his window, the transit corridor was quieter now. The end of the academic day, students filing toward the residential levels in the particular unhurried way of people who have finished their work. He watched them for a moment. Somewhere among them, or not among them, already on her way to wherever she was going next, was a 19-year-old who had walked into his intake office with a 2.1 kid equivalent score and a trail marker on her pack, and had not once, in the entire time he had known her, seemed to think any of what had happened was remarkable. He turned off his display. He picked up the sealed survival suit from the corner of his desk where it had been sitting since yesterday morning, still in its packaging, never opened, and put it back in the storage cabinet. He turned off the light and left.